Всем привет, это проект Альфа.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman. You are watching Live War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Hello Alexey. Good evening. The main news we would want to start today is Biden, who is not a presidential candidate anymore, and I think it changes some things. And I would like to hear your opinion about the effects. Well, honestly speaking, does it change much? Does it change anything? I can say two things that can definitely be noticed. The crisis of ideas with the Ukrainian so-called patriotic left in Ukraine, who grew up on the grants from Democrats from the United States, and they are in a slight shock and trying to present some irony behind the nervous smile. And we need to understand that 2/3 of Ukrainian politicum who are oriented towards European project, they were formed on the grants from Democrats, failing to create any relations with the Republican side, and they never did. They're waiting, they're looking into a serious crisis as a political class, as the group that was looking up to the US Democrats who are singing their songs, who are taking their money, supporting their ideas. Now they will have to change. And this is just one side of the story. Probably future elections in Ukraine and the future destiny of this class here. Now, as for United States, we see that Kamala Harris, who is named as a candidate, is not too different in terms of percentage or recent polling from Biden or Trump, and the situation hasn't drastically changed. You cannot say that Trump has 100% chance to win. Understandably, he has higher chance than Kamala, but we have 3 months of very intense campaign ahead of us. A lot of things may happen, and we don't know yet how people will vote at the end of it. Although Republicans in the United States, and myself as well, are pretty optimistic looking at Trump's chances. And if there will not be any significant black swans, then he likely will prevail. And that means that right conservatism gets to power in the United States. And this is the class that I associate myself with in the part of certain political views. Of course, I have my own, which I disclose as the fifth project, but overall I'm right-centrist leaning in my politics. So these people are much closer to me than left-centrist or left fringe. All those globalist Democrats are pretty far from me. So yes, we will be observing the crisis of political class in Ukraine, and rights are the ones fighting in the trenches, they're fighting in the front, the left is fighting for political power. And until now they were supported by the Democrat Party for the most part of the United States with their grants. So we'll see what happens. Okay, if we step backward from political convictions and just do some analysis and some facts that we already have, do you think Harris has better chances to be elected than Biden had? Well, if she has more chances, that's only because of the fear, because there is a group of Democrats that are in panic about the proposition that Trump might win, and her electorate is driven by fear. So in some sort, she did not lose those voters. They actually are trying to unite and trying to continue to get scared together. Current polling shows a very small difference in preference between candidates. It's only 2%, and we know that due to certain peculiarities of count and certain procedures, if the difference between the candidates is minimal, American elections can be swayed one way or another. So they'll be fighting for every vote in this case, and it will be a very difficult election if the percentage stays. Do you think Kamala Harris can mobilize the electorate of Democrats? And I've read different reviews. There are some people opposing her election. They actually are hoping that there'll be an open platform for Democrats, and they're getting ready for some competition perhaps somebody getting presented from Democrat Party as a different candidate as a result. Do you think they all agree with Kamala Harris? I think the period of political agreement has already gone, and even on the Republican side, not everybody agrees with Trump. It's just his supporters are more vocal, and there are way more of them than anybody else. Same in Democrat side, there are forces and sponsors who are not happy with Kamala and her options, but Democratic Party is in serious crisis. And by the way, Republican Party is also in crisis, and that's why they have Trump. But the crisis is so serious that Trump exists for the third term now, right? His term, Biden's term, and he's still on. So Kamala Harris, to say the least, and I'm trying to be soft here, people are not expecting creativity from her. They would prefer a bright, charismatic leader to unite them all. And I don't think they have such a leader. Kamala is definitely not such a leader. They have one option from fear, so they will be exacerbating the supposed evil that Trump may bring with him, and they will continue fear-mongering their audience to make sure that that scares them enough to go and vote. They'll be talking about the collapse of the United States, the closure of foreign politics, betraying the friends, etc. In reality, it'll be realpolitik when he comes. And that turned to realpolitik approach versus 30-year-long, probably since the time of USSR collapse, the politics of Obama-Biden in recent years, Hillary, Obama, Biden, the Democratic wing, when there are a lot of right words and very few right deeds. So any logical person would be celebrating return to realpolitik versus that. I'm celebrating. Look, with all that, Biden supposedly was finishing his actions, his campaign as candidate. He was trying to unite people. He made soft appeals to his nation to try to preserve the unity of people. Do you think the Democrats will perhaps continue that rhetoric? Do not break the country with fear, but maybe try to unify? Or they don't have any other ways to mobilize? They don't have other ways to mobilize, exactly. So they will definitely use fear. And by the way, Trump, on the Congress of Republican Party, where he was officially appointed as the candidate, he declared that he is going to be a president of not half of America, but the whole America. Because if you go as president of a half of the country and that wins over the other half, this is not a victory, this is defeat. So he did find good words, he did find right words. It's modern politics, people are talking about unity. In Ukraine now, we have people crying on the nationalist and Euro-Atlantic side. They're crying for Irina Farion, who was assassinated. And they're all talking about unity, and with Russian attempt to break Ukraine with shooting of her, that failed, and Ukraine needs to stay united. But in reality, they are grieving the death of the person in such fashion who actually taught her grandkids to kick and hit Russian-speaking kids in the kindergarten. Is it truly about unity? So all people will be talking about unity. In reality, is still playing on separating the society into different groups. And there's it's an abyss of difference between appeals to unity and real unity. The words about unity, while still breaking the things apart, this is the politics of Democrat Party in the United States. Ukrainian politics, with some very few exceptions, are relying on the same model. What is Ukrainian politics? It's the politics of Democrats, the same archetype. A lot of right words and complete absence, lack of the right deeds, and actually presence of negative deeds. And Poroshenko congressmen, they are talking now about unity. They're the ones who started back, a decade ago, the ideological project for splitting the country. They're saying that Ukraine will be free, and they're laughing at the Johnson's message, who is saying that Russian-speaking in Ukraine should have special rights in Ukraine. There are some errors in translating Johnson's statement in Ukrainian, and there were means of protection. People translated that as personal defense means, and people are laughing in Ukraine, giggling as to what, gas masks or batons. But this is giggling at the expense of half of the country. I'm not meaning just Russian speaking. There could be half, could be more actually. And frankly, who will come out today and acknowledge that they do speak Russian? But there are a lot of Ukrainian speakers who are still supporting the white project. And Poroshenko's side with this is actually trying to suppress them, to suppress their opinions while still talking about unity. That's why I am pro-Trump, and that's why I'm supporting Republicans and conservatives in the United States, because I'm leaning to the right-centric. They are lying less. There are other issues with them, but they lie less. They're not talking about unity. They're saying, yes, we have some enemies and we need to suppress them. At least it's honest. But when they're talking about unity and under the guise of it, they will still squashing the opposition in all matters they can find. This is more about Democrats and Ukrainian politics. All right, let's talk about Johnson a bit later. I have a few more questions to make sure we complete the agenda of elections in the United States before we proceed to the next questions. So first of all, yes, significant change has happened. And if we talk about Kamala Harris as new candidate, as a VP, she was not really visible. She was never really even a second. Usually Blinken or Sullivan were higher in the pecking order and just appearing more often and more important appearances than Kamala Harris. So she looks, and I want to be straight here, she looks like a Schrodinger's cat or cat in a bag. Very unclear what she will bring. But in front of Ukraine, we do have the same task, right? We need to make sure we have bipartisan support in the United States. So it's absolutely unclear how should we be building our relations now and how we should be behaving in these situations, regardless of political preferences. And here, instead of power, we cannot just bet on one side, on Trump or on Kamala Harris. We should choose some path in the middle. Or am I wrong? Which power are you talking about, Nikolai? Ukrainian? Yes. Well, Ukrainian power has maybe half a year to go. They need to start thinking not only what to do with, or not so much as to how to deal with the United States, but rather what they will be doing after they resign from power. They should probably start collecting money for a very modest wreath to top their political activity, not them personally. And if we're talking about Ukraine, we should try to avoid the same mistake that we've been doing for 30 plus years, continuous betting on one side. So how Ukrainian politicians usually talk with Washington, D.C. They usually hire some lobbyists, and lobbyists, they usually have origins in one political side or the other, and as a result, all the eggs are in one basket. At the end of it, the basket with eggs goes on the head of our politicians, and the eggs slowly leak down the face, and it repeats over and over again, because nobody has strategic thinking there. Their thoughts are as short as Pinocchio's, and they can not calculate these consequences of their decisions. For example, the Conservative Party rule in Britain till 2024. Quite a long time, right? There was a big period. Now we have laborists in power. While Britons were ruling, our powers created their own system of relations. And all of a sudden, there is Laborist Party in charge. And meantime, we have not talked to them. We have been pushing them aside. When they were coming, we were not receiving them. This is the level of politics that's maybe on the level of the second or the third year of kindergarten. Somewhere between 4 and 6 years old. Let's unite with whomever we see nearby and be friends against somebody who is not with us. Unfortunately, that's what we've been doing in our country in politics, while systemic politics, multilateral politics is more important. And the words about bipartisan and multilateral should be real words, not just words on paper. In reality, they dove head and shoulders deep into Sullivan and didn't even surface. And when the guys from Republican side were coming to help, they were pushed out because Sullivan's friends were telling us not to. So now we have to eat what we have sown. Trump talks with different sides on the language of ultimatums. He knows the real situation, and he has no illusions about who Ukrainian politicians are, especially given how dependent they are on Democrats. If he's going to remove 25,000 bureaucrats who, from his point of view, have occupied the top echelons of power in the United States, mostly Democrats, he wants to create basically a revolution situation there. Do you think he will have more respect or more piety to Ukrainian politicians? And speaking of Kamala Harris, she used to be a compromise figure. Who is VP in elections? Usually it's a person who you want that person to attract the other side of your electorate, whom you cannot. And she has been pushed into power via a system of compromises. Indeed, being a VP, she was not solving too many difficult things. She's not like good old days political groups. She was in the shadow of Blinken and Sullivan. And those two are an cabinet, essentially, or representatives of Hillary and Obama line of power. And again, this is a peculiarity of American politics. She is inheriting Biden's cabinet, Biden's office, and perhaps Biden will resign from presidency even sooner. So then Kamala becomes an acting president, de facto. And we'll see how that will unfold. Out of those aides, Blinken and Sullivan, I want to say that Blinken is probably strongest. He's the person from the intel services. Sullivan is more of a parte genosa, a party member growing from the nest of Hillary Clinton, if to quote American observers on that topic. So Blinken is most rational out of Democrats right now in that group. But then again, next question, how Democrat is he? Or is he a creation of a deep state who was placed there to keep an eye on all of them in the office? That's another good question. But elections will be bright. We definitely are seeing them already unfolding, and there's more to come, I'm sure. Well, according to everybody, these elections will be destiny-changing for the United States. And there'll be some situation unfolding after. You know, Nikolai, if Ukraine was more of an independent state, we would have less destiny-changing elections. Otherwise, we have British elections that can change our destiny, American elections that can change our destiny, Russian elections are here nearby as well. I would love to create a country that is not dependent so much on foreign elections, the country that can walk on its own 2 feet. Which destiny-changing elections do you mean? It doesn't matter. In ideal situation, one would want to create a system that even elections within the country would not change much, because regardless of which side of the parties would come to steer, strategic course would not change at large, because that would be a joint compromise already by the time they're getting in office. The joint compromise between different parties who understand the importance of that vector. Unfortunately, it's still a long way for us to grow to that situation, but it doesn't mean we should give up on trying. Let me clarify on your phrase, Ukrainian government has only 6 months left. Can you elaborate on this? Why do you think it's only 6 months? Oh, I'm quoting President Zelensky. In his interview to BBC, he was saying that he acknowledges or allows for an eventuality where he would not be staying at presidency after the end of this war. That's one. Second, the war continues, country needs elections, and even if the war is to continue, we need to find a way to run the elections. Not in a single statement he says about himself running. Do you know what American taxi drivers are saying? Sarcasm here, but very often you hear that, I don't know where you are, but looking at your face, I would say you probably are from Ukraine. So they do recognize you, Alexey. Yeah, they kind of do. And basically, the taxi driver could tell you that the decision for Zelensky not to run was made in spring. and it was approved with America in spring. And it started to be leaked into the media now in midsummer. That's why we don't need now to rely on some rumors from Washington from taxi drivers, but we can just rely on Zelensky's own statements. Taxi driver is a figure of speech. Well, it's a simple situation, really, Nikolai. I don't know what you are not understanding here, but let me, God, pick the right words for that. Him and his group are leaving, and Ukraine now will have a chance to change their destiny, and it depends upon our citizens whether they will shoot themselves in the head or they will be able to be rational and take care of their future. I'm quoting here, President Zelensky affords for an opportunity, for an eventuality where he does not run on the elections if the war is over. Well, right, Nikolai. And for November, we already have a summit planned, a peace summit. And they were talking about inviting Putin if they have to. I just want to ask a question. How about this law, that the bill that President signed, that one should not negotiate with Putin? How do you circumnavigate that obstacle? Right, they need to change that, I agree. And President Zelensky made a statement, again, I'm reading here, quoting, that it's not so important for him whom to talk to in order to finish this war. And he did express, answering more questions, that he could even talk to Putin. So it is weird. It seemed like it did matter for him up until now, and it doesn't matter at this moment. And yeah, there is another nuance, Nikolai, here, that Putin said he is not going to sign anything with Zelensky. So path to peace is Zelensky, lies through Zelensky leaving office. That's what, in quotes, Washington taxi drivers are saying, and that's what Zelensky is starting to slip into the media. And that's why I'm saying elections probably in March of 25 will likely occur. Again, probably 1 year later than they should have due to war, and they probably will join parliament elections with presidential elections to not spend too much money. And then in half a year, President Zelensky becomes, that's how he becomes a citizen Zelensky, and we'll see what happens later. Nobody will agree to war that will continue to unfold for another 10 years or just more years to come. It is difficult for our nation, difficult for everybody, and it'll be a lot more casualties and victims. We already have a ton. We should prevent it. I would be delighted to conduct elections if I could have done it during the war. If the war will stretch to last longer, we'll try everything to make sure it stops, but if it will continue and we'll have to find some solution, I don't know what solution will be yet. So my question here, Alexey, is what can happen if the war indeed lasts longer than half a year and President can still come out and say, I don't know what decision to take? Do you think that may happen? Well, a miracle may happen, Nikolai, I think. America may actually come out and say more actively that it's time to do that. Evil tongues among those taxi drivers are saying that there are no money in American budget for Ukraine, for the war in Ukraine. They're not planned in the project of a budget. Evil tongues in Moscow are also saying that they also cannot really plan for war for next year. They do not really have money. And very evil tongues are saying that it's a consensus decision between China, States, Russia, and European Union. I don't think that President Zelensky will have enough arguments to break this higher level agreement. And that's why right now he is bringing this to media as a possibility, but one can see through these words. And you can notice that he had strategically changed his dress in jump, in flight. My question is, where are the Ukrainians? Why are they not pointing fingers at Zelensky, asking, how come you're violating your own bill? And it's his party still in power in Ukraine. The inertia is still amazing because they're still proposing bills to punish those who are talking about peace, while their leader is talking about peace. They're threatening jail times for those people who talk about peace solutions right now, unless you're President Zelensky. So unless your last name starts with a Z, you should not be talking about that. Everybody else need to be punished via the criminal code. And as our commentators are saying, they should not be treated like Farion, but they should be punished for affording themselves to talk about peace, scumbags. So I'm still trying to understand. Is there any difference between us now and USSR of 1952? We look very much alike at this point. Alexey, it seems that the bloggers who were appealing to a society to come to some agreements and did talk about stopping the war by any means necessary, right? They got into the peacekeeper database and they were punished by our security services, and they did. They got visited. At least one of them did. And basically the message is, you guys, you serfs, should not be thinking about these things. Only president can. And I have a kind message to all these Ukrainian security enforcers. What are you guys going to do 6 months later when power will change? You think people will forget whom you came to, how you threatened, which criminal cases did you instigate? Just give it a thought, because the day of strategic changing should probably be noted by you as well. Because life is a difficult thing. You never know what will happen when the new power comes. Well, there should be some joint information policy, right, during the war. What should be said, what should not be said, who needs to be defining it. Alexey, I think at the beginning we had some framework. Well, Nikolai, since when is our government media policy touching upon personal opinion of people who express that in social media? This is called not a single information policies. This is called totalitarianism. You understand that? When a person in kitchen or on a social media on his own page cannot express his own opinion, aren't we the country who's supposedly fighting for freedoms and democracy? I understand when one should not be publishing the movements of our troops during the war, or when we prohibit our people to publish data as to where did the missiles hit as a result of Russian attack. But one should note that same Zelensky, President Zelensky, did say that, did appeal to people to publish the pictures of attack on the children's hospital in violation of his own laws and rules. And enforcement services have visited people before for much less. So one would want to actually express and somehow set the framework to be universal. Otherwise, you have to outline that, okay, this is normally the rule, but if I desire to express certain things, then the whole country needs to support my desires. And all that is being presented as the freest and most democratic country in the world, while it is just blatant authoritarianism. How Kiev Mayor Klitschko have noted in his recent interview. He did say that we are rolling down the hill into authoritarianism. I suggest we go back to his interview a little later. I did want to talk about him and the details, but regarding, I don't know if we call it freedom of expression in Ukraine, Zelensky initiated the project about removing or recalling the awards from people for praising Russian Federation. And he said that we're trying to follow justice in regards of those people who lost all right to be respected. This is a project to implement changes to Criminal Code of Ukraine and procedural codes of Ukraine about recalling government awards for popularization or bringing up to the media propaganda of the aggressor or discussing in favorable light of any hostile actions against Ukraine. And more details need to be reviewed to this process, but we also should call them traitors. And on one hand, one can say, right, this is maybe logical or emotionally logical, but how correct it is to bring such punishment? And is it the right time to bring this criteria right now? Because what ends up happening, it's difficult to discern one from another. The work of counter-propaganda, how do you implement that during these times? Who needs to regulate that, if not officially some power authorities? Let me ask another question. Can there be an open public hearing and freedom of speech when the drafting committee is capturing people on the street, just those who walk by?
Well, we gotta have some discussion, some public discourse about it. Oh, you mean there's gotta be some people who are untouchable, who can discuss? No, I mean the ones who probably have reservation from draft, who are already performing important functions in industry. Well, imagine you are busy, you have a reservation in the industry, you go talk about something, and then you're being slapped for popularizing the aggressor. And let me ask this then. If president says we are suffering big losses, is it popularization of the enemy's propaganda? Because that's exactly what Putin is saying. He's saying, I pity Ukraine because they suffer big losses. They should have signed Istanbul Accords. They should have stopped earlier. Is Zelensky already a match for his own law? Well, that's a good question, right? Or, for example, Nikolai, when they speak about peace, what do those fighters and enforcement agencies and Zelensky himself and his media resources, what are they talking about? What are they saying about those who address the matter of peace? They're saying those people are traitors and we need special law to repress them. It's only Putin who talks about peace and it's only Putin who wants peace. They're saying they don't need peace. We'll continue fighting, right? And then Zelensky comes out and says, okay, the first line on the agenda today, 10 to 12, is being heroic on the front. The second item is we discuss peace in Switzerland, where we also invite Putin. And then he repeats the words of Putin that Ukraine cannot fight too long. We suffer huge losses. And then he ends it with the fact that if anybody else starts talking about our big losses and the need to sit down and negotiate and find peace solution, those will be repressed according to our new law. And this is our unified information policy. Well, if you put it like this, yep. All right, I do want to progress our stream to the next topic, to Johnson, because he apparently then is also propagating Kremlin narratives, right? Oh yeah, right, another traitor. So he changed his colors rather quickly. Previously, he was basically the only person, as we painted him, that he was the only person who was preventing us from signing Istanbul Accords and insisting that Ukraine should resist and fight. How do you see his current initiative? That Boris Johnson. Well, let's ask a fundamental question. Is it his initiative? I can put it this way. There is an ongoing and rather intensive contact between British conservatism and American conservatism and other conservative movements, especially English-speaking ones. They have a rather tight union and they've been working on the agenda of consolidating the right and right-center forces to resist the left lean in the world's policies and politics. And apparently they are rather successful. Look at the right turn in Europe and also Trump's success in America. By the way, Musk, Jordan Peterson, many other significant names do belong to that group. And also a bunch of names who do not tell people much, but with a lot of influence. So they'll belong to that group. And what Johnson is giving out looks very much like a consolidated plan of these conservatists. And if you notice, recently there was a publication, some British experts made a statement that Ukraine should not be treating church in the fashion that it was. Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchy. They left, at least formally, they denounced their ties with Moscow, but it's still in their name for now. So for them, the matter of church is rather painful. And they do say that we understand there are probably a lot of spies and a lot of priests and clergymen have ranks under their dresses. But there is a difference between repressing the whole church and addressing those who harm the country. And those people who are closer to J.D. Vance, and according to some, J.D. Vance himself and perhaps Trump as well, are promising some sanctions against some Ukrainian congressmen who are pushing for prosecution of the religion, of that branch of Orthodoxy. Can you remember when I first made a dire warning to our politicians here on these streams? And when these warriors like Peter Poroshenko and his flock will get targeted by additional sanctions. That'll be an interesting situation, because Ukrainian political elite did not have any brains and still does not have any. And I hope it's a sunsetting class of our politics. I told them times and times again, do not touch the church. Do not touch the church by itself as it is, and also on the backdrop of right conservatists taking power in our allies' countries, where people, when you just shake their hands, they ask you, what religion are you? How many kids do you have? We need to make sure our matters of church and religion are very well regulated. And I approached our government authorities with the initiative, let me do this, let me take care of this difficult problem, because I do understand the complexity of it. And one thing, if you look for the individual traitors and work with those people as physical persons, another is if you attack the church as a government. We should have launched a proper canonical process. Our government said different thing. What it should have said, church is outside of our process, but look, they're following with their own processes to cleanse themselves of Moscow influence. And you should have gathered their canonical, according to the canonical law, gather the right groups in this church, start working with the clear, with the world, and make sure that they go through all the right processes. And catching spies, that's a whole other agenda. For that, you don't need to capture monasteries or cathedrals. And if there are others who are just doing money laundering through the church organs, again, this is a matter of individual people. This should not be constituted as attack on church, and it should not be carried out as attack on church. According to some conservative data, we have 2.5 million people of this belief, of this faith. According to more realistic, 4 to 6 million of people belong to this religion. A lot of them, big numbers of them, are fighting on the front. They've been mostly on the eastern side of Ukraine, and they're the ones, a lot of them are fighting in the trenches. And our Ukrainian government is spitting in their face with prosecution of that church. And I'm softening the words here, because if you heard what people are saying now in America, who will likely get to power, and even if they lose, they will still have a lot of influence through Parliament, through the Congress and Senate. And if you understood, the vast majority of enforcing agencies of military are supporting of Trump's agenda in the United States. And of course, the highest level, they do play some politics, and they can be looking democratic and left-leaning, but just a layer below that, middle and lower levels, they're all very conservative. Most of them are. And many times we've tried to indicate to our Ukrainian politicum that, guys, you need to be careful at touching these matters. And as I said many times before, the world is round, and it has seems to have a funny shape of a suitcase, and people do meet in the corners. And when Trump prevails in elections, that'll set in motion a bunch of sessions and meetings. And the call of Trump to Zelensky was one of those. After which Zelensky, by the way, came out and said, well, I will be resigning after the war. We probably should find a peace solution. We need to start talking to Putin somehow. I think he got explained what and how, and his options will happen after the elections change the political landscape in America. Unless there is some other black swan flying over our planet, because God has a very specific sense of humor. But as far as we can see, that's where it all goes for now. And then the pendulum will start swinging in a different direction for all they've done and all they have not done in our political power. All right, I want to ask one rather simple question, Alexey. I think we should not be viewing everything that's happening with this branch of orthodoxy of Moscow Patriarchy as persecution of faith. It's not that. Right, it's not persecution of faith, but it's government's persecution of a religious organization on the ideological basis of the organization that has several million followers. That's radically different action than a search for spies or finding the spy networks and the agents brought here by Moscow. Obviously, they do exist within this church. Only the fool would denounce that. But to catch a spy, you don't need to take away church property. You do not capture cathedrals. You do not accuse them of things that they're not doing. And I do want to remind our listeners that Onufry, one of the leaders of our church, he is originally from the western Ukraine, and at 7:15 in the morning, 2 hours after the beginning of Moscow invasion, he made a scolding statement on Putin's invasion, accusing him and basically expressing his position in the open. Special forces in Russia were not in the helicopters yet, and they haven't even started flying towards Kiev, and he had no assurances that he will live to the evening. And yet he took this position at his own peril. And it's difficult for this church to change Moscow Patriarchy, to remove it from their name. It's a long canonical process. They have launched it. They have started it. And instead of us as a country supporting this process and helping them to be what they want to become, of course, the church should not be national church, right? They should be above that. But they should have enough freedom to form their own policies, to remove the enemy's influence, and government should help them and qualify these activities not as foreign church influence, but as individual spies who are doing certain harm. And capturing of cathedrals, pushing them out of ownership of some property that they have, this all is qualified not only by the right Republicans, but everywhere in other countries. All the normal and reasonable people, they do qualify it. For example, Professor Thomas Brandt, a German fellow, one of the coolest specialists on the history of the church, he had declared many times that he is deeply concerned by the prosecution of church in Ukraine. I know this guy personally. It's difficult to find a more balanced person who would not want to meddle with politics. He's a classic academic specialist in his field. But he said that I could not hold it longer, and I made that statement several times, because what's happening in Ukraine is way beyond the framework of the Western understanding of normalcy. And with all that, he's deeply, as a principle, outside of politics. And there's a nuance, he has a huge authority in certain matters. And he qualifies our political actions here as the representative of academia and as the person who knows the history of church, who knows it by heart. He is the author of one of the books that was translated here in Ukraine, Church and Empire. It's about the history of Moscow Orthodoxy with all the nuance, difficult relations of church with political powers. And he underlines that this is a classic case of attacking the church on the level of the government of Ukraine. What if fool is working like this? Tell me, please. Church is a canonical right. Government has nothing to do there. Government needs to create welcoming conditions for them, create an open dialogue, help them engage representatives of different confessions, help them create additional intra-church connections, build a more complex system of relations between different churches and religions in our country. We're a polycultural, poly-religious country. There are also 25, if you look at the percentage, you've got Muslim, Protestants, Orthodox, we have Armenian church, we have Georgian church, we have Judaism. When Russians were capturing Crimea, there was a unique case when mullahs of the Islamic religions out there in Crimea allowed the Orthodox clergy to serve some of their services in their facilities because the others were destroyed or otherwise unavailable, captured. So Ukraine is a unique place where three different civilizations meet. The Western, the Byzantine or Orthodox civilization, let's call it this way, and so, once again, the Western Catholic Protestant, Eastern European, Poland, Ukraine, and Moscow Greek Turkish influence. And that's the uniqueness of our culture. We are at the crossroads of the world. Our confessional state is a simple mirror of that. And all the leading specialists and just normal people in the world understand that, and an attempt to change the character of the country will not end in anything good, neither inside Ukraine nor outside. And however long the current authorities would be jumping and telling everybody that will prevail over everybody, one day there'll be guys coming to power in the United States who do care about religion and faith and freedom of those, and only after that about politics. And they're rather decisive. They don't like just saying words. They actually like deeds. And they're already rubbing their hands in expectation of the righteous acts as they see them, with what I can congratulate those heroic attackers in our political government on the religion. Alexey, maybe we should move the discussion on religion to a whole separate stream. I think we could dive deeper into this topic, and I'm not a specialist. I wasn't preparing for the religious, narrow specialized discussion today with religion and freedom of conscience and what practices are in the world. So perhaps it deserves a good discussion with somebody who can answer a lot of formal questions as well. I think perhaps to start with, an important question would be, is it persecution on the religious basis or not? You said, no, it's not that. Right, it's not persecution on the religion basis, but it's government interference in the matters of religion, which is qualified as totalitarian trend in the Ukrainian politics. All right, that's a big question, and it does have a potential to affect sanctions against the country. And people are naming Poroshenko and his group as those who can be hit by those sanctions, and he's one of the living presidents of Ukraine, ex-president. And if you're not against it, let's put an ellipsis here, ... and we'll get back to that later in a different stream. Oh, sure, I'm just being guided here by you, so wherever you want to lead the stream, I'll follow. Nikolai. All right, then let's get to the plan of Johnson, or the plan of world conservatism, or whatever that plan represents. Perhaps it also does reinforce Trump's positions in his election campaign. But if you treat this plan seriously, does it look realistic, or is it the beginning, the first ball for the negotiations? Well, no, it's just as heightened expectations as Putin's plan. Give me 5 districts, sign everything, otherwise beware, right? Everybody starts with trump cards, with a strong suit, and then, of course, they will go down and find some agreement in the middle. There is no perspective for Ukraine to join NATO. EU is a maybe remote perspective. Again, NATO, near 15 years, surely no. Second, and I will ask here a rhetoric question once again. How long can we keep deceiving our people with NATO? There'll be no NATO. Look in the realpolitik aspect of it. NATO is telling us there will be no NATO. And Johnson is talking about arming up Ukraine to the brim, so it will become the proper shield of Europe, and it will show Putin. This is, if not Medvedev's Twitter account, but it's maybe a response. It can be qualified as a response to his mad tweets. So same thing with the roll the borders to the 24th of February. Again, not realistic. What will likely happen? We'll likely freeze the conflict alongside the front. There's probably an option to change Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea for Kherson and Zaporozhye districts, because according to Russians and their own research, population there is very loyal to Ukraine. 75% on the occupied territories, and Zaporozhye and Kherson are supportive of Ukraine, and it's difficult to rule them. When you have a population like this, it's a very difficult proposition. You mean those that they have captured, or the whole region? No, the ones that they've captured, the occupied territories. But the key, the main key to this negotiation will be an exchange of all that for neutral status. The size of the army, the size of armed forces, the questions of Russian language and Russian church, despite how some people prop it up to be important, these are all secondary to the main question of neutrality of Ukraine. This is the key for Putin, and he is holding a rather rational politics here. We can discard all the accusations that he is completely mad. He perhaps is mad, but he is working his own framework, which is logical if you measure it. And to achieve this task, they're ready for rational exchange. Now let's take the West. The West wants Putin to not win in any case, and they want to not affirm the results of his aggression in the world law as a legal precedent as the success. When the aggressor can acquire, as a result of his aggression, can receive certain political results de jure. And that's what Putin's main obstacle now, because he's asking for a paper, and nobody's going to give him this paper. And I think the West understands that position clearly. And then we're going to the gray political zone. No peace, no war. Main conflict ends, and some secondary agreements might be signed about, for example, neutrality of Ukraine, withdrawing the NATO element from our politics, perhaps leaving us with EU. And that's the main interest for Russia, the neutrality. Everything else, territory, exact border drafting, church, other things, this is all around that main principle. Neutrality of Ukraine with guarantees that it will never join NATO, and absence of important or visible NATO influence on the territory of Ukraine, of NATO and United States. And the Western goal is simple too. Do not let Ukraine be captured. Anything on the right bank of the river, everything there must stay Ukrainian. Preserve Ukraine as the buffer between the West and Russia. Do not allow for Ukraine to be consumed by Russia. And they understand that this is real political status, and they're eager to sacrifice Ukrainian position with NATO in order to achieve their goal. So that's the Western. And this is very rational on both sides. Different frames, but within them, they're rational. And what's opposing it is our propaganda that sped up the train of our society to such a degree that Putin wants to destroy the whole country and will never surrender, to such a degree that it prevents us from signing the deal. Personal signifier of this propaganda, its machinist, and the person who ordered that propaganda was President Zelensky, until the moment when he started talking about peace. But by that time, propaganda reached such a level that society is not even noticing now that strategic change in his statements, that the train is now turning in a different direction. And the main order, that who ordered propaganda, is trying to stop or say the same things for what you're sending enforcement agencies to some Masha, the blogger from some city, and punish her. He's making exact same statements from his pulpit at the helm of the country. And of course, we have two different opinions here within Ukraine. The right side, which is, we'll defeat Russia, we'll reach Vladivostok, our troops will be walking in Red Square. This is also not so. And all our bravery is hinging upon the fact that the West is still helping us. If the West slows down by 50% what they're sending to Ukraine, our front is running a risk of collapse. The West has a complete influence on our position. And this is one of the key problems of our politics of the 33 years of our independence, because we failed to become part of the West. They did not acknowledge us as the West. But instead of changing ourselves to become more West-like, change our laws, our trade, constitutional guarantees, we just wanted the West to accept us the way we are. Russia, for 33 years, was conducting a different politics. They also wanted to be considered their own West's part of the West, by the West. Except for we tried to be nice, and Russia was trying to fight the West to get acknowledged. But both Russia and Ukraine, they're still seeking support from the West. And the West is the arbiter who's deciding what's going to happen here. And this is the main result of all 33 years and this war in particular. What we would need instead, I think we need real sovereignty. And the basis for real sovereignty is neutrality in this case, neutrality of Ukraine. On one simple, rational reason, I would also want to join NATO, but they will not take us. And the price for joining NATO is the war with Russia. Without NATO, we cannot fight it, and NATO does not want us to be part of it. And this really narrow framework that they're putting Ukraine in, you're fighting for NATO but will not take you, will not adopt you into NATO. I don't like that situation. I like the situation when we decide our own destiny, and that is only possible in practice when we are independent. We can write anything we want in Constitution. We can write 250 articles in it where it says NATO, 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 NATO on every page. It will not change anything. And this is the topic of real trade. Zelensky will not be able to sign any agreement because Putin will not sign it with him. Problem is that he is refusing to do it. We need new leadership of Ukraine. Zelensky can stop the war, he can get to the ceasefire. And then we have a fork. We either continue with Zelensky still alive, perhaps some Stefanchuk will be forced to sign that agreement with Russia, where they will affix and affirm that neutrality. There probably is no other option on the table. Otherwise, there will be continuation of this war. And then all the hatred and all the emotions of those people in our society who still believed in the borders of 91 and the destruction of damned Russian Empire. And that person will be consuming all that negativity, which is kind of honest if Zelensky would be the focal person of that, because he created this and he should bear the brunt. But Putin is refusing to sign anything with him. Or an option would be to stop the war under Zelensky. We cease shooting at the front on both sides. Zelensky and his team leave, and the whole group is leaving. And the new leadership of Ukraine then comes out and signs peace agreements, the basis of which will be neutrality. And they take the whole brunt of radicals and upset citizens who are expecting that we'll capture Vladivostok next week. And here is going to be a big downer for them. No NATO, no Vladivostok, and even part of Ukraine will still continue to be occupied by Russia. So we are facing a very interesting historic and political task in the next 6 months. We already are on this track. Look at the summer trend. We know that new trends starting in the autumn, but I do want to understand our listeners to understand the real topic of negotiations, because you're being showed some plans, rational, irrational, one, the other. You argue with them, but the matter of trade is neutrality of Ukraine, neutral status of the country. Everything else is secondary. Russians are ready to sacrifice certain things as long as they get the neutrality. The West seriously is ready to forfeit certain goals as long as Russia behaves reasonably. And the central question that we should be posting today is Russian politics rational, or they will deceive us again? What do patriots in Russia believe? They believe that they need a little respite in order to continue this fight. I was talking about that before as well. I did warn us that this is a possible branch of development of events. But it's possible only in the condition when we did not learn the lessons of history and we insist on not being neutral and continue on joining NATO. I will remind here once again, the cost for Ukraine in joining NATO is a big war with Russia. As long as we go down this line, we will be facing this war. This is not Russian propaganda, this is an opinion of collective West, of that NATO, by the way. And note, every time when we hear that, of course, Ukraine will join NATO, there's always somebody, some nice person coming out, like President of Czech Republic, Peter Pavel, and says, well, you know, it's not exactly defined history, we don't have dates for Ukraine. Or the head of NATO himself, after that declaration that Ukraine is a fantastic future member, comes out and says nobody can say when will it happen. And they're balancing it this way. And the sooner that you understand this thought, the sooner you disembark from that train of propaganda that is riding on your brains, the better it will be for the country and for you as well. And everything else, all the other commentary about arming Ukraine and other things, that's all good, but no. This is like Medvedev's tweets and his Telegram channel. We'll huff and puff and we'll show the world. NATO, by the way, recently published that 500,000 soldiers they're ready to bring to the front if the big war with Russia happens. This is a serious argument, right? Why do they inject this argument? Americans sometimes throw additional commentary. We can review our decision about limiting Ukraine in using long-range weapons in Russian territory, because both sides are trading their positions now. They're discussing, if you soften your position a little, we'll keep restrained. If you will continue pushing forward, we will allow Ukraine to do more. But I can say one thing, the whole world is stunned with the irrational politics of Ukraine. This is the most irrational politics on the table. Rational Russians, in their rationality, albeit, but still they're holding their heads saying, why are we fighting? We should have just signed that and be done with it. Rationals on the West are also saying, hey, here is logic. We'll support you. Here is the help. You'll be de facto with NATO, right? You'll be our flank anyway. You'll not be de euro in NATO, but, we'll still be supportive. But no. Big eyes. We are going to fight. We are going to resist. We will destroy the damned empire. And the West starts asking a question. Are you fighting for people or for territory? What are you fighting for? Territories change. Those people who grew up in the Soviet Union, they may believe that borders are unchangeable. But in Europe, over the last 100 years, the borders have changed a lot of times. 25, 30 years. In every 25, 30 years, countries change their borders to some degree. So that you understood, Germany changed 7 forms of governance since 1900 and changed its shape 7 times. Czech Republic, I think 6 times went through that. Ukraine, I think at least 7 during the 20th century. Changed the name, changed the territory, changed the government course, changed the form of governance. And this is all within lifespan of people who are about 80 years old now, who live in the west of Ukraine. The borders have changed numerous times on them. This is norm, actually. So the question, in the 21st century, are you mostly about the borders or about people? I am for people. I'm interested in keeping Ukrainian soldiers alive, Ukrainian children alive, Ukrainian citizens alive. Territory will come, territory will go, then Putin will disappear and the territories will move back. Or something else happens. Many things will happen in the years to come. But I would appreciate if people would remain alive, that they would have a chance to realize everything they want in their lives, everything best they want in the framework of the country they can hold. And the size of the country depends upon the level of organization and how attractive it is. The fact that Eastern Ukrainians, who suffered the most from Putin, from war, from our politics, the fact that they're pariahs in their own country, and on the level of parliament, they're discussing now the diminishing of help to the Eastern refugees. What is that about? Is it about the territory or about people? Are we fighting for the farm somewhere? Or are we fighting for our people? I want a country that cares about its people wherever they are, or those who associate themselves with Ukraine. That's the country we need. As for the farm, today it's yours, tomorrow it'll be ours. We'll take it back. But that's possible to have a discussion in the framework I'm suggesting when all sides are standing on their both feet on the ground firmly and try to stay logical. So people, there is propaganda on one side where there's all the churn, where people accusing each other of treason, using enforcement agencies and all that. This is all the fluff. The real core of trade with the West, and by the way, both Democrats and Republicans agree on this, it's an opinion of collective West and Russia, is the neutrality of Ukraine. That's the main trading point. Please understand that, at last. Those who can understand the world rationally, and you'll understand what's happening. You'll understand all these slips of Zelensky and Johnson and the rest. That's the key to understanding this situation. And be ready that neutrality, neutral status of Ukraine will be adopted sooner or later. And if it won't, then we're facing the second round of this war in 28 or 29, for which we'll be worse prepared too than Russia, and Russia will likely be more successful in it than we will be. Because unfortunately we're not the country who can behave itself smart, not during the war, not during peace times. With the small exception, if we elect the right person, perhaps we will have the right preparation in the country and the war will never happen. But that's from the future. Let's see what will happen in March of next year. End of hour 1.